How to set up a camping tent for beginners. Step 1 is finding flat ground. It's important that you check out the ground and make sure there's no marks of prior flooding, and that the site doesn't generally angle towards that flat ground, because after a big rain, that water can swamp the underside of your tent. You also want to look up, make sure there's no widow makers or dead branches that could come down on you during a storm. You don't want to be too close to your fire pit, just to avoid sparks coming and landing on your tent or your tent Rainfly. Now, it doesn't matter what tent brand you're using, these tips will be applicable for any tent you have. Don't just throw your tent bag aside. Let's save this so we could stuff some things into it. It's really easy to get lost otherwise. Your tent will generally come with a footprint or ground tarp. In addition, you'll have the tent itself and a Rainfly, and then the stakes or poles. The first step is focusing on the ground cover or footprint. A ground cover is extremely useful for keeping water out of the bottom of your tent. It also protects the bottom of your tent from anything like sharp sticks or rocks underneath, and it makes packing up your tent that much easier. This ground sheet will be much easier to dry than the entire bottom of your tent. Even if your tent doesn't have a ground footprint, that's totally fine. You don't actually need one. It's really just an extra precaution. I tend to like to use them, and you could substitute this with a tarp, although you have to fold in the edges so that water doesn't pool on that tarp and go underneath. We first want to imagine where our doors are going to be. Our tent doors are going to be on the long side, so we could pre-plan that those are good entry and exit places. On this ground cloth, the webbing straps are color-coded, and this side all has no color, where over here, there's a red tab, and the other one down there also has a red tab. This indicates the door is on this direction. Now that we have approximately where our ground sheet's gonna lie, it's time to set up the tent. First, get out your tent poles. Take the bag for your tent poles and put it inside your bigger tent bag. That way everything stays together. Put this aside again, we're gonna add more stuff to it after. Doesn't matter what style poles your tent has, just assemble them at this point. Now we have the tent itself, and this tent in particular has our red toggles at the door side, which match the red toggles on the ground sheet. Not all tents have this color-coded system, but I find if you have one, it really helps. Just lay your tent approximately over your ground sheet. The ground sheet will naturally be slightly smaller than the tent itself. That's to prevent rain from coming down the sides and going onto that ground sheet and then under your tent. Before putting the poles in, it's important that we first stake out the corners. Especially if you're setting up a tent alone, it could be really difficult to do solo if you haven't staked them out first. You can see we have a grommet here, a buckle, and then this part is where your stake goes. You want to angle your stake towards your tent on a 45-degree angle if you can, and push that in. You never want to hammer this with rocks. It could bend and dent the stake. Instead, just lean on it with your foot. The angle is towards your tent because it has a harder time pulling out. If you're having trouble getting your tent stakes in on rocky or hard ground, there's one trick you could do. Grab a small rock and wrap your tent guy line around it. Then grab a larger rock and place that right in front. This will be a good anchor even in some pretty high winds, and you could do a taut line hitch, which I'll talk about later in this video. So we'll pull our back one to get it decently in line. Now the fourth one's always the easiest. You could pull taut against all your corners. Now it's time for the tent poles. Grab one end, and now we could put the end of that tent pole through this one grommet. And if you want, you could also put it through the bottom ground sheet grommet, two at once. You could clip in your buckles as you go. On some tents, you may need to clip after. I prefer on this one to clip first. And now we go directly across from the one we just seated in the grommet. And as you put pressure, because it's already pegged down, that'll stay put. If you haven't pegged it down, this will be very difficult. I just place it in. Could place the footprint in too. And we'll get this side here. And the final side. The biggest room for failure is not putting the tent pegs in first. And this one just clips to the top to hold it all up. Now we could take a look if we like the positioning, if anything's scrunched up. To me, it looks pretty good. Not every tent has this, but this is a vestibule pole. You slide it across the top and we'll thread it through the grommet there. And on the back side, when we thread it through, it gives extra width to the tent. So now that we have our tent set up, you could choose whether to put a Rainfly or a tarp or nothing at all. Sometimes when there's a nice breeze in the middle of the day, it's really nice to just be in a tent just like this. But let's go ahead and set up the Rainfly. Now, not all tents will have this, but this Rainfly as well has our color-coded sides. So we have red here and red here. So we know it matches this entrance here. If your tent doesn't have the color-coded, just look for the tent's door and line that in the middle with your door here. Again, if you don't have the coloring, throw your fly over and align the center with the door. This tent has buckles at the sides to clip in. If your tent doesn't have buckles, it might have grommets, and in that case, the tent pegs goes through them. Keep these loose for the beginning because we now need to peg out the vestibule, which goes about to here. Keep your zipper closed at this part, and we want to peg it out pretty much as far as it could go. If your tent has a door on the back side, we could do the same here. Now it's time to tighten all the buckles. We could just pull down to tighten, and on these ones we pull up to tighten. We could open the tent door, and this can roll back just like so. And on the inside, there'll usually be some sort of toggle, which can pin it open if you need to. There should be all sorts of extra attachment points like this, which you could tie a guy line, which is a thin rope, and peg that out, just to stake it out a little bit more and give you a little bit more room. At the sides here, there's additional guy out points where we could peg to the ground and tie up to pull out the sides a little bit more in case rain's coming down on an angle, so it doesn't get in your tent. I like to do a taut line hitch here, because you could slide it to tighten, or you could loosen to release. I'll link a video in the comments on how to do this knot if you haven't learned it before. It's my favorite camping knot. Make sure you take your peg bag and put it back in that tent bag so everything is kept all in one. Oftentimes there's pockets inside the tent, and that's where I'll keep this bag with everything in it so that when I'm breaking down, I know where everything is. Now, a tent fly is good, but you may opt to put a tarp over top as well. Some people like an extra vestibule, and it just makes sure that rain will not get in your tent. These are all things to consider when you're thinking about your location for a tent. Can you string a tarp line across and set up a tarp that goes just over your tent as well? Think about the hot sun coming down. If it's going to be beating on this tent all day, it's going to be very hot going to sleep on a hot summer day. Think about the wind direction. You want the angular parts of the tent facing into that wind, not a flat surface, because then it'll blow your tent from the side. Unbuckle the fly. Now, if your tent is small enough, there's a fun trick to clean out all the debris and sticks or sand that's in your tent. Once all the pegs are out, open one door or both doors and just lift your tent like this and shake it. And now your tent is clean on the inside. Undo all of your clips first. And now we can take down our poles. Put your poles back in your tent bag. And now to roll up your tent, getting the least amount of dirt, it's best to do it right on your ground sheet. This is another reason why the ground sheet helps so much. Some people will put their tent poles on the tent and roll everything up together. I prefer to just keep them aside and add it afterwards. It totally depends on preference and what tent you have. If you've dried out your tent fly or it didn't rain, now we could lay it on top. If you're in a rush to get out, lay it on top. You could dry all this stuff out when you get home if you want. We'll try to lay it as even as possible. I like to grab my tent bag and put it here as a reference to see the size I need to fold it up. You could dry out your ground sheet if you want, but if not, just fold it with the tarp to get the approximate size of the bag. And the ground sheet is underneath, so the tent itself is staying clean. You could roll it on the ground like this, or if you're worried about having it even cleaner, we could roll it like this. I pinch it between my legs. And now the tent is in here, and if you haven't added your poles or your pegs yet, we could add those now. Thank you all for watching. If you want to learn my favorite knot, the taut line hitch, I'd highly recommend it. I'll link it here. And for more camping and outdoor tutorials, check out the Bear Essentials channel. I'm your friend DJ from the Bear Essentials, and thanks for stopping by.